Welcome to an episode of r/slash malicious compliance, where we share stories of people conforming to the letter, but not the spirit of a request. Sit back and enjoy these stories, and at the end of this video, make sure to like and comment, and definitely subscribe if you have not already done so. Enjoy. And this story is posted by u/SparkleFritz. You can't leave until you shovel all of the snow. This wasn't me doing the malicious compliance nor the request, but the middleman who witnessed this gloriousness. I work for a movie theater company in a state that snows every winter. We had a contract with a snow shoveling company, but my boss refused to use it because the cost of each removal had a possibility of hurting his yearly bonus by a couple percent points, like $300 max out of $20,000. Only if it snows more than 6 inches, he would say every time. Unfortunately, this meant that one of the ushers would have to shovel snow on the sidewalk. Since it's a safety hazard to block the emergency exit doors of a theater, it meant you had to shovel a path around the entire building and for each exit door. Ultimately, due to the size, it's about a quarter mile around the building. No one likes doing it because it's cold and shoveling a simple 1 shovel length path can take 2 hours. During a snowy Christmas week, the busiest week for movie theaters of the year, imagine Black Friday shopping for 2 weeks straight, it had snowed just under 6 inches. We were extremely busy, and my boss demanded to take one of our much-needed ushers to go shovel snow. I was an assistant manager. When we asked if the company could come out instead of us doing it, we were told no, to which one of my coworkers, we'll call him Dan, said he would do it. An hour later, after he had gone outside, one by one, my boss pulled each usher in and wrote them up for refusing to shovel snow. When Dan came back and the other ushers complained to him about it, Dan asked our boss why, and our boss said that it was because no one wanted to shovel all of the snow, and if Dan didn't shovel all of the snow, he would get ridden up as well. This all happened at the beginning of my shift around 5 p.m. Cue the malicious compliance. What my boss didn't realize was that it was the last day of the payroll period. Being Christmas week, Dan had already accumulated 40 hours of work earlier in the day. My boss left right after telling Dan to make sure all of the snow was removed. We worked the rest of the shift and everyone assumed Dan had finished and left. It's 3 a.m. now and we go to punch out for the week but can't because there is a shift that hasn't been approved yet. Someone is still working and it is at 12 hours of overtime. It's Dan. I go out to investigate since it should only be myself and my manager. As I walk outside, I see Dan coming back in, smiling the biggest grin on his face and the most dry, unsnowed path I've ever seen in my life. It looked like 2 pictures cut together. There was not a speck of snow on the entire front path of the theater. Dan spent 10 hours outside making sure that he removed all the snow from the walkway. We had a good laugh, clocked off, and left. We didn't hear anything until later that week when I was called into the office and had to write out a statement to why I let Dan work 12 hours of overtime. He had this smug look on his face like he had beaten us. He was not too pleased when he found out that all of our statements included him saying the phrase, "remove all the snow," and that he refused to call the snowplow company. My boss was transferred to another theater soon after. And this story is posted by u/antipatico_6. My first job was a lesson in work to rule, a very obedient payback. I got hired onto my first job when I was 17. It was something of a fast food/coffee shop blend, and in my region, there are more of these chains than there are Starbucks chains. After a 10-minute interview and some paperwork, I was hired on. I would later find out that minors were the preferred hires at this location since it was likely their first job and they might in turn be unfamiliar with labor laws. My mother makes a decent income going to work sites and dealing with on-site injuries, labor rights infractions, and so on. Her job is to make workplaces safer and spare them potential lawsuits. Through the stories she shared and the online handbook I devoured about labor law rights in my region, I had a decent picture of how ethical workplaces operate. As it turns out, my new workplace was not so ethical. Your breaks were considered more of a privilege than a right, and you could be pulled out of your break to help up front at any time with no opportunity to make up that break time later. I earned a great deal of scorn from my manager by asking for a 30-minute break on my 7-hour shift instead of a 15-minute one. Here, you are legally entitled to 30 minutes for every 5 hours worked. There were so many weird corner-cutting things going on that could create a disaster scenario in terms of safety. Climbing on whatever is available instead of using a ladder, the ladder was broken, poor food safety, and the occasional fire in the toaster oven because new hires weren't instructed on how to use it safely. Not much instruction on how to use the corrosive cleaners, and if you had to clean the oven in the back kitchen, you were lucky if you received an unused mask or PPE that wasn't damaged. Burns, rashes, sprained ankles, and cuts were not uncommon. I badly burned my arm with hot coffee and immediately went to treat it, then asked for the right forms to fill out to report on my injury. I was scolded for leaving the front end, told there were no forms, and informed that no one reports on burns anyway. If we reported every burn or slip and fall in a coffee shop, we'd never get through all the paperwork. The burn blistered with time and eventually required some prescription antibiotic cream from my physician. I was fed up, but intimidated at the thought of trying to formally report these people for safety and labor violations. Everyone else seemed to accept what was going on. I was trying to save money to move out, and in my head, the odds of getting hired elsewhere seemed slim. I decided to do something unconventional. I thought I was the first to come up with it at the time, but I would later find out that my plan was a classic workers' protest tactic. I was going to work to rule, follow every policy to the exact letter, which would inevitably slow things down and create obstacles to efficiency. It started with the cappuccino machine and the ice drink machine. The cappuccino machine is to be cleaned once daily, and the ice drink machine is to be changed weekly. These are both lengthy processes that leave the machines out of commissions for a while. No one did it regularly, and we had an issue in the past where we got complaints about the taste of ice drinks, only to pop the top off the machine and discover some kind of filmy, moldy growth on the surface. Seemed like a good place to start. I took great care to drain them and give the detachables parts a long soak and a thorough scrub. This angered customers who wanted their drinks right away. I had been there for a while at this point and instructed anyone I trained not to hesitate to get the manager if their customer has an issue they can't resolve. And so it went that every shift involved me cleaning some machine and my manager placating impatient customers. We had this pre-prepared specialty tea that almost never got ordered, but nonetheless, it was policy to change the pot of tea every 30 minutes for freshness. No one did this. The tea would sit for hours. I decided this tea needed special attention and made sure I was changing it regularly. The result was that we went through our stock faster than we ever had before. We frequently ran out, and the stock orders had to be changed to accommodate a greater supply of the tea. I took care to check our freshness dates on the prepackaged foods. If it was expired, it was trash. This pained me, and I don't like to waste food, but we had a strict policy on freshness of product. I tried to wiggle on this, only throwing it out if it was 3+ days over. Nonetheless, the result was empty display cases, low stock, and a need to, again, adjust stock to accommodate for the food supply needs that come into play when policy is actually being followed. I was assigned the sandwich and soup station, perhaps in an effort to keep me away from other things. However, it was wonderful new territory to work to rule. I changed gloves after every order, as the handbook indicated we should. I took care to clean out all the receptacles before putting new toppings in them. The handbook indicated we were supposed to cool vats of soup in ice baths to bring them to a safe temperature before storing them in the fridge. I made sure it was done, which was inconvenient to management when they could have had me working on something else before the shift was over. I kept abiding by the rules, rigidly and to their fullest extent. Management was incredibly pissed off and communicated as much when I wasn't around. However, I had turned 18 by this point. I could now legally work past a certain time, supervise the teenage employees, and close the store. Until they hired on someone else who could work the hours I was working, it was something of a pickle for them. I also offered no hostility or indication I was being spiteful. If you were on the outside looking in, you might see me as an employee who did the jobs no one else wanted to do. It wouldn't have been easy to call me out to higher-ups. My coworkers, despite the inconveniences by proxy they probably had to put up with, didn't seem to mind. They were interested to see how it would play out and told me as much. I decided to quit after a conversation with the store owner herself. She indicated that she wasn't fond of kids who think they know how to run a business she's been running for years and had some other choice words for me. I told her on the spot, "Oh, I understand completely. I'll submit my written notice for you tomorrow. My resignation letter wasn't just a resignation letter. The first few lines were as much. What followed was a list of safety infractions and labor law violations with dates and examples attached. It was incomplete since I only started recording these a few months in, yet it managed to be pretty extensive. I said something along the lines of, I trust you will address these problems in a timely manner. There was a quiet implication in some of my other language that the Better Business Bureau, health inspector, and associated safety organizations in my region would be happy to help them out. I gave 2 weeks notice in the interest of my coworkers who would have had to take extra shifts if I left abruptly. I was scheduled for 5 of the 14 days. They wanted me out, and they wanted me out as soon as they could get me out. I didn't return to this location for several months, even though I lived fairly close to it. I eventually got curious and went back to check things out. The place looked very different. You walked in and it just felt cleaner. The employees looked happier, though I didn't see any familiar faces. The location had come under new ownership and had been completely turned around. I have no idea if I played a role in the store changing hands or getting fixed up. I only know that for several months, I was a relentless pain in the butt for quietly, obediently following the rules, and I left a letter in my wake that created unease. And this story is posted by u/sunsetlink. Sure, you can cheat off my test. Backstory. So back in my freshman year of high school, our biology class was due to take an exam to determine what we learned for the semester, normal high school stuff, you know. The tables in my biology class were those lab desks that could sit 2 people at the tables side by side, and my desk mate was a nice enough kid who would always come to class high and try to copy my homework. So science in general isn't my best subject, never has been, but I try to study to at least pass my exams. My desk mate, I'll call Dallas, was the type of kid who would come in, take out a notebook, and fall asleep with his head thrown back while the teacher would teach, and then take pictures of my notes when class would end. Now, I never felt the need to be stingy with my notes because he was a nice enough person and would occasionally offer me gum or candy and ask how I was doing. Anywho, the day of the test comes around and everyone knows there's 2 different versions of the test since we have desk mates, but apparently Dallas didn't realize that, and halfway through the test, I noticed that all his answers matched mine exactly, meaning he was copying my test. So to make it easier for him to cheat, I moved my test answer sheet in between us to make it easier for him to see and continue taking my test and waited till he finished copying to turn it in. Afterwards, when we got our test back, I had received like an 88 or something, and he had majorly flunked the test. He asked me why we got different grades if he copied all my answers, and I told it was because he had a different test than me. He looked at both our answer sheets and the exam questions again and just laughed it off and said, I got him good. This has been TNA Top Notch Audio. 3 great funny stories. And my question to you is, which one of these stories are your favorites and why? Share your comments below, and also don't forget to subscribe so you can get notification of more videos in the future. Have yourselves a great day.